Drill, baby, drill.
With sour trade relations south of the border, some see it as our drill, baby, drill moment, much to the chagrin of others.
We live in the greatest country in the entire world, bar none. We live in the greatest sub-sovereign nation in the world, bar none. And we could be the richest, most powerful, most secure jurisdiction anywhere in the entire world.
The sound of drilling is echoing across Nova Scotia's countryside. What began as a quiet geological project has turned into something far larger. In this small Atlantic province, officials are calling it our drill baby drill moment. It's not just about rocks or minerals anymore, it's about power. For decades, Canada's resource-rich provinces watched as global markets and foreign governments shaped their economic fate, but now Nova Scotia has decided to change that. Its message is simple. If the world wants critical minerals, Canada will be the one to supply them, and on its own terms. This is the story of how one province became the front line of Canada's new economic independence at a time when its southern neighbor is tightening every screw of its trade agenda. The turning point came quietly but decisively. After years of slow development and environmental caution, Nova Scotia's government announced a sweeping reversal in 2025. It lifted long-standing bans on uranium exploration, removed moratorium on natural gas fracking, and shortened the permit process for mineral exploration. The move shocked even seasoned observers, but it was born from a realization. Canada's economy could no longer rely on imported minerals or the uncertain goodwill of its allies. As the United States tightened its grip on North American supply chains, and as China restricted the export of rare earths, the world entered a scramble for materials that power everything from batteries to fighter jets. In this race, Canada saw both a threat and an opportunity. For Nova Scotia, the response was simple. Rather than waiting for foreign partners to dictate terms, it would start digging and take control of its own future. The deeper motivation was about sovereignty. The provincial government framed the move as part of a broader national awakening, a recognition that energy security and industrial stability begin with control over raw materials. Federal policymakers in Ottawa have repeatedly cited Nova Scotia as a model for strategic autonomy, noting that the province's reforms mirror Canada's new partnerships with Japan and the European Union on battery minerals. By moving first, Nova Scotia positioned itself not as a follower of federal directives, but as the engine of a new national resource strategy, one that blends economic survival with political assertion.
In the rural town of Brazil Lake, where granite hills meet dense forests, the government's new policy took on real meaning. A prospector had been waiting for years to drill for lithium, one of the most valuable minerals of the modern age. When negotiations with a private landowner collapsed, the province stepped in and invoked a rarely used law to force access to the site. It was a move that divided the province. For some, it was heavy-handed. For others, it was leadership. By 2022, mineral claims in Nova Scotia had already tripled to 27,000. Roughly half of those were lithium-related. The International Energy Agency projected that global lithium demand would increase 40-fold by 2040. That forecast turned what was once a niche mineral into a strategic gold mine. Veteran prospectors estimate that even a small lithium mine could create jobs worth about $100,000 per year for local communities, with full-scale projects employing around 200 workers. The message from Halifax was clear. Nova Scotia would not sit on its resources while others decided their fate. It was no longer just economic policy, it was an act of defiance. But this defiance also exposed deep social divides. Many residents, including eighth-generation landowners and Indigenous communities, feared being excluded from decisions that could reshape their environment for decades. The provincial government promised consultation, but skepticism remained high. To its supporters, this was the price of progress, a necessary trade-off to compete in a world dominated by industrial giants. To its critics, it symbolized the erosion of local rights under the weight of global demand. Either way, the policy made one thing clear. Nova Scotia was willing to cross political and social lines to claim its share of the resource future.
To understand the weight of this decision, you have to look south. In 2025, The United States, under President Donald Trump's second term, doubled down on its America First trade agenda. Washington imposed tariffs ranging from 10 to 100% on imports, including metals, vehicles, and industrial components. The intention was to strengthen American industry. The result was very different. Canada, long treated as a predictable supplier, began to rewire its strategy. Prime Minister Mark Carney's government used the tension to accelerate a broader industrial plan. Ottawa and the provinces turned toward Europe and Asia, negotiating sectoral resource agreements to diversify away from U.S. dependence. In that context, Nova Scotia's push for critical mineral development was not an isolated act. It was part of a nationwide movement to secure sovereignty over natural resources, from lithium to cobalt to uranium and rare earth elements. Ironically, Washington's attempt to dominate the North American supply chain pushed its closest ally to build one of its own. The trade war that was meant to secure America's advantage ended up awakening a new competitor right next door. Nova Scotia's mineral rush is still in its early days, but it already carries enormous symbolic weight. It represents a new chapter in Canada's economic identity, one defined by self-reliance, resource control, and a willingness to challenge the status quo. The province's gamble is not without risks. Environmental concerns are real, Indigenous leaders warn that they have not been properly consulted, and the question of how far governments can go in forcing exploration on private land remains unsettled. Yet one fact is undeniable. Canada is no longer waiting for approval. From lithium mines to uranium fields, the country is building a resource firewall that could redefine its relationship with the United States. The North American trade conflict has moved underground, quite literally, and as drills pierce the bedrock of Nova Scotia, they are uncovering not just minerals, but a deeper shift in the balance of power across the continent.
Almost all of the current cobalt supply comes from China.
Cobalt is considered a key material in the race to build the batteries that power electric vehicles.
As major financial strides are being taken to open North America's first cobalt refinery plant in North Cobalt.
This is going to be the very first critical minerals project to reach production of any sort of significance in Canada in many, many years.
While headlines focus on tariffs and trade disputes, another shift is quietly reshaping the future of North America. The United States, a country that prides itself on industrial dominance, may soon depend on Canada for one of the most important materials of the clean energy age. That material is cobalt. It is essential for electric vehicle batteries, defense technology, and advanced electronics. And almost all of it today comes from refining operations in China. This is why the announcement from Ontario matters. The province has pledged 17.5 million Canadian dollars toward the first large-scale cobalt refinery in North America. At first glance, it looks like a regional investment. In reality, it signals a strategic turn that could place Canada at the center of North America's energy transition.
The project is led by Electra Battery Materials in Temiskaming Shores, a community in northern Ontario. Once completed, it will produce about 6,500 tons of battery-grade cobalt sulfate each year. That is enough to supply materials for roughly 1 million electric vehicles annually. It will also create around 50 direct jobs in the area, with more indirect work tied to logistics and construction. The cost of building the refinery is estimated at 100 million Canadian dollars. Ontario's contribution is part of a broader financing mix. The United States Department of Defense has already provided $20 million US dollars, showing Washington's concern about reliable supply. Electra itself is restructuring to cut debt by 60% and raise $30 million US dollars in new equity. Talks with Canada's federal government are underway for an additional 20 million Canadian dollars. These are not small gestures. They are building blocks for the first critical minerals project of real scale to reach production in Canada in many years. The economic upside is clear. At current market levels, annual revenues from 6,500 tons of cobalt sulfate could range between 160 and 230 million US dollars. Analysts following Electra's restructuring estimate the refinery could generate around $30 million in earnings before interest, taxes, and depreciation once it is running steadily. Beyond numbers, the strategic benefits are significant. Canada moves from being a supplier of raw ore to holding a high-value position in the EV supply chain. This strengthens its credibility as a secure and transparent supplier without ties to foreign state-linked entities. For policymakers, it reinforces the logic of Bill C-5, known as the One Canadian Economy legislation, which is designed to speed up approvals for mining and energy projects. The refinery shows that Canada can actually deliver. It is a demonstration project, but one with continental reach. Canada also gains something less tangible but equally important: negotiating leverage. In past trade disputes, Ottawa has often been the side under pressure, whether on dairy quotas or lumber tariffs. With cobalt, the balance shifts. Possessing the only refinery of its kind in North America allows Canada to speak not just as a junior partner, but as a gatekeeper of critical technology inputs. This leverage could shape future talks on auto rules of origin, EV mandates, and even defense procurement, where secure mineral supply is now considered a matter of national security.
The United States faces a basic problem. It has growing demand for cobalt in electric vehicles and defense systems, yet it has no large domestic refining capacity. China continues to dominate the market, and Washington has made clear it wants alternatives. By 2027, when Electra expects to begin production, American automakers and defense contractors are likely to look north to secure supply. Canada cannot cover all of U.S. demand, but this refinery can provide a reliable North American source that reduces exposure to Beijing. That creates a new dynamic. For once, Canada holds a card that Washington needs. Tariffs and trade disputes may strain the relationship, but cobalt has the power to reset it. The energy transition in the United States will not be built only on Detroit assembly lines. It will also depend on a refinery in northern Ontario, funded in part by a provincial pledge that may change the balance of supply chains across the continent.
Denmark is accusing the United States, one of its closest allies, of acting more like an adversary by conducting covert operations in Greenland.
Denmark and the U.S. are close allies, not only in NATO, but in many different fields. Friends and allies, they don't spy on each other.
Greenland has long been viewed as a strategically important territory for global powers. With vast natural resources and a commanding position in the Arctic, it has drawn attention far beyond its size. Today, the island is again at the center of tension. Denmark has accused the United States of running covert operations to stir division inside Greenland, a charge that has shaken one of NATO's closest alliances. Danish officials warn that such influence campaigns violate international law and trust among allies. At the same time, Canada is moving in a very different direction. Instead of pressure, Ottawa is strengthening ties with Denmark through green energy and trade cooperation, signaling that the Arctic is no longer an arena dominated by Washington alone.
One way or the other, we're going to get it.
Trump's focus on Greenland is not new. The island offers enormous strategic value. From military bases that monitor Russia to deposits of critical minerals, securing Greenland would give the United States leverage in the global balance of power. Reports from Denmark's public broadcaster revealed that at least 3 Americans with connections to Trump or his administration were linked to covert influence campaigns. These operatives were said to encourage separatist sentiment and build networks sympathetic to Trump's ambitions. To many observers in Europe, this resembled Russia's earlier tactics in Ukraine, where local divisions were amplified before force was applied. Denmark responded by summoning the top U.S. diplomat in Copenhagen and opening investigations. The implications go beyond Greenland itself, raising doubts about whether the United States is undermining trust inside NATO, an alliance meant to prevent this very behavior.
Denmark and the U.S. are, like Canada, members of NATO.
The Danish public broadcaster uncovered evidence in a stunning investigation that men with ties to Trump tried to infiltrate Greenland, pointing to intelligence that at least 3 Americans with connections to the president were involved in covert influence operations. Trump has repeatedly threatened to annex the territory, which, like Canada, has vast critical minerals and strategic military bases in the Arctic.
While Washington's actions spark controversy, Canada is carving out a quieter but highly significant role with Denmark. Ottawa has been working with Copenhagen to build what some call a green trade corridor. In February 2025, Canada joined the Global Offshore Wind Alliance, a move that tied its Atlantic provinces to Denmark's world-leading expertise in offshore wind. Projects like the Toklu Wind and Hydrogen Development in Newfoundland and Labrador, backed by Copenhagen infrastructure partners, aim to produce green hydrogen for export to Europe. Denmark's concept of energy islands, artificial platforms that connect wind farms and hydrogen production, is already influencing Canadian planning. Beyond energy, Canada's aluminum sector is also gaining an edge. Because Canadian aluminum is produced largely with hydropower, it is among the cleanest in the world. With the European Union's carbon border adjustment mechanism set to take effect in 2026, aluminum produced with fossil fuels will face new tariffs. That gives Canadian producers a competitive advantage, as Europe looks for reliable, low-carbon suppliers. In 2024, Canada-Denmark bilateral trade reached about $2.7 billion according to official figures, but the real significance lies in the kind of trade being developed. Green energy technology, hydrogen, and Arctic cooperation are all areas where Canada and Denmark are laying the groundwork for long-term influence.
What emerges are 2 competing futures. On one side, Donald Trump pursues influence with threats and alleged covert operations. On the other, Canada and Denmark build their position through cooperation, sustainable industries, and a steady link to Europe. Canada is not merely reacting to American pressure. By aligning with Denmark, it is creating strategic options that reduce dependence on the U.S. market and broaden its reach across the Atlantic. The future of the Arctic will not be defined by who makes the loudest claims, but by who builds the most resilient alliances. On that front, Canada and Denmark already stand strong, showing that influence can be earned through partnership rather than force.